So next up, we've got Tyler Webb and how to get your first 100,000 followers and why they don't matter. I matter if I'm following. Just throwing that out there. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Charles. Thank you, guys. You can hear me all right? Good. So I'm Tyler. Little backstory. So when I was in high school, honestly, I thought I'd made it. I was 16 years old, and I'd earned my first 100,000 followers. The story goes, there was a kid in my hometown of Green Bay, something I hope you don't hold against me these next 25 minutes, and he had grown this Twitter account to 10,000 followers before he was a junior in high school. And he was reaching 1 million people every single month, and I just remember being so enamored by the fact that some kid could create content, post content around something he was so passionate about and reach so many people. And he was from the same city that I was. So I didn't have any prerequisite skill to help him, but I knew I needed to be a part of this somehow. So he agreed to take a meeting with me, and through some false posturing, some self-confidence that I'm a little too good at sometimes, he agreed to let me help. And throughout the rest of high school into college, we grew this account to 150,000 followers. We were reaching 10+ million people every single month. The trajectory was incredible, and I thought, man, I'm 16, 17 years old. Is it always going to be this easy? And through the content we were posting, a lot of it was just this curated football content, stuff we didn't even own. But we were able to build this community of 6 figures worth of people, able to do some really cool things. We were developing merchandise lines. We were developing sub-brands in other sports. We had a team of 8 people that was working for us to help on all of these projects. We were working with sponsors that were really big in the football space. I even got on the field of a University of Minnesota game just because some coach who had followed us thought, these kids look like they'd want to be at the field, and they were completely right. It was awesome. And things were going so well. We even had reached the point where on Twitter, and I don't know if they still do this, but when you created a new account and you selected football as one of your interests, they would suggest that you followed us. So there was one point where every single week we were getting 10,000 new followers of new accounts. And again, I thought, man, I think life is just always going to be this easy. There is no way things are ever going to take a turn for the worst. Until they inevitably did, right? So Twitter, without much forewarning, changed their copyright policy, and all of this content that we were curating that we didn't technically own stood in violation of these copyright policies, and our account was indefinitely suspended. But you're probably sitting here thinking, okay, Tyler, you seem like a smart enough guy. You probably had the foresight to take some of these followers and move them to Instagram or Facebook and take all of your eggs out of one basket. And the short answer is no, we did not have that foresight. So when this account was suspended, as were our access to those 150,000 followers. But you heard me talk about some sponsors, so we probably had a little bit of money saved up to go out and maybe pivot the brand, work on the merchandise line, and we didn't. We were only making $200 a month, and we were splitting that between 8 people. And the moral of the story isn't meant to be a pity party for me, although at the time it was probably the most devastating thing to happen to a 17-year-old on the face of the earth. But it acts as a lesson, and it's a lesson that I know I've carried through with me into my now young career. And that is, if you're focused on followers as the outcome, you're already doing it wrong. And to be honest with you, we didn't take very good care of these people that followed us. We saw their engagement with us and their engagement with our account as an outcome of what we were doing. What I want to talk about today is how we can turn that on its head, and how we can take what we think to be an outcome of following and lead with digital engagement, and take engagement and put it out in front and have it act as the reason for our growth. I nailed that timing, didn't I? So we have to answer this question before we can start engaging with those people. How do we grow a following? Because in order to have people to engage with, we have to first have them be there. And if you don't take anything else away from this presentation today, I want you to understand the next slide, because this is the driving force behind what all of these platforms do. The driving force behind the algorithms that you hear so much about, behind the machine learning that run these platforms. And their goal is to keep users on the platform longer. If they can do that, they can make more money. They can monetize your users, you as users more and more, and the cottage industry that has developed around these algorithms changing. You'll see people that are experts in social media, and there are certainly a lot of people who know what they're talking about, but if they were just to distill everything they're talking about, it would be to get to this final utopia. If Mark Zuckerberg had a fever dream, it would be that you never left Facebook, right? And that's part of the reason he's developing Metaverse. But we also see We also see this on other platforms that we don't usually closely associate with social media. Airbnb, for instance, obviously got popular off of vacation rentals, but they don't want you to leave the platform once you found a place to stay. So now they offer experiences that you can book once you get there. DoorDash obviously is popular for food delivery, but if you feel like cooking, you can now get your groceries with DoorDash. Similarly, Amazon, you might feel a need to decompress with shopping, but you can also do that with their music and streaming library. Consider something like Instagram, a platform that we obviously more closely associate with social media, and they're now allowing you to have the entire shopping process facilitated on their platform. So before, when you had to go to somebody's link in bio, click off the platform, and maybe never return, you could have this whole process facilitated within Instagram. And their hope is obviously that you stick around and you keep scrolling, and they can monetize your ad impressions. So now that we understand what happens to our content, or how the algorithm drives our content, we need to see, okay, when it's given up, when we post it, what actually goes about. So I think we all intuitively understand that our content isn't seen by all of the people that follow us. If that were the case, when we posted to 20,000 followers on Facebook, we would get 20,000 impressions, and we'd probably get a lot more likes than we're getting right now. But that's not the case. And so what happens is that our content is shown to a subset of users first. So let's say it's shown first to 100 users, and that content is given a score based on engagement. And that score is weighted by what we talked about earlier. How long does the content keep users on the platform? So something like a video replay is going to be worth much more than a like, because somebody likes it and keeps scrolling. Once that content is scored, that score is given back to the algorithm, the machine learning, and it's moved up to the next section, only if it's deemed to have a high enough score. And this will happen over and over and over again until it reaches all maximum relevant users. This is where we see our content going viral. But I think we also understand that not every platform has the same potential for this organic reach. I think you guys would probably tell me, even though I'm the guy talking to you about social media, that TikTok is probably better for reaching people than Facebook is, right? And there are a couple platforms and features on platforms that are better for this organic reach. A couple that I really like right now are Instagram Reels, of course TikTok, something that's been really popular the past year and a half, and LinkedIn Video, especially for you people that work in B2B. But I don't want you to just look at these platforms and these features and say, okay, there's a guy with a clicker on stage that's telling me about them. These are probably the good ones, the only ones I'm going to focus on going forward, because new platforms and new features are coming out it seems like every single day. And that could be overwhelming because we can think, God, we got to be on every single one of these platforms. We have to be using every single one of these features. And I would posit that that's not true. As long as some of these features or some of these platforms check a couple of boxes, those should be the ones that we're focusing on. Those are going to be the ones that give us the biggest bang for our buck. So at the same time that you see me recommending you these platforms, I don't want you just to say, okay, these are it, I'm going to go forward. We have to understand why we want to be using them. And the first reason behind why these platforms are so good, in my opinion, is because they satisfy some condition within the content discoverability curve. So to explain this, I'm sure we're all familiar with the microeconomic concept of supply and demand, right? There's two lines, and where they meet, we have an equilibrium of price and quantity. We can think of content in a very similar way. On the y-axis, we have discoverability, and on the x-axis, we have quantity of content. So if we assume, for the sample's purposes, that content demand doesn't really change with this platform, what's going to change, what we're going to focus on, is how much content, what the supply of content is on that platform. So what I mean by discoverability is just how easy is it for people to find your content, people that don't already follow you. Okay, so on a new platform, like we see here, your discoverability is pretty high because not a lot of people are on that platform creating content. You're not competing with a lot of content to get found. However, as that platform becomes more mature, and as more people come to that platform to create, the supply is going to increase. But that's going to impact your discoverability, which is going to inevitably decrease. You can also think about it as you're now just competing with more people to have your content be found. The second part of this scorecard, if you would like to call it that, is the dynamics of the creator economy. And I honestly probably could have given a 25-minute conversation about the creator economy, a new term that's sort of been emerging when we talk about people that are acting as influencers for a living. And there's this really interesting conversation a TikTok executive had where he talked about the fact that they bolstered a couple creators on their platform to act as aspirational figures. So you can think of, if you've heard the names Charli D'Amelio or Addison Rae, these like really popular TikTok stars. They have hundreds of millions of followers. And they were bolstered within TikTok's algorithm to act as aspirational figures, so when new users came to the platform, they saw these certain individuals and said, oh, they're not that different from me. I could, if I created on this platform, end up being as famous as them. So what we need to consider when we look at platforms that we consider putting our attention towards, we need to look at, are they incentivizing creation in the same way? So if we look at one platform that's going to be on one end of the spectrum, we have Twitter, where 10% of the users are responsible for posting 80% of tweets. That's going to have a really short-tail distribution of content being created. If we juxtapose this with TikTok, we have 83% of users that have posted a video on the platform, which gives us a longer tail. There's going to be more volume of content being created. But why is this important at all? Well, if we look back to what I said at the very beginning, remember I told you it was the most important slide, the goal of these platforms is to try to keep people on them for longer. And the golden goose of doing this is having people create. I don't know if you've ever created a TikTok or an Instagram reel, but it is one of the most infuriating things that you could ever do. But beyond spending time creating that content, you also are going to come back and check in on how many likes you're getting and how many comments you're getting. You might fire back some comments. You might look at the people that are engaging with your content. So you're spending exponentially more time on that platform than you would if you were just creating, or if you were just consuming. So we need to be looking at the platforms and the features on certain platforms that are incentivizing this creation. And TikTok does a really good job incentivizing with trends and sounds, but there are going to be new platforms that emerge that might fit the same criteria. So now that we've discussed a little bit behind the why, what makes these platforms run, I want to send you away with a few pragmatic tips of how you can apply this understanding. So the first thing I would like you to remember is that there is unfortunately going to be a threshold on certain social media platforms for you to obtain organic growth. So all that means, if we use Instagram as an example, is that you're going to have 2,000 followers before you can consistently be seen on the Explore page, be seen by people that don't already follow you. And so my suggestion to you would be to make sure you're doing close to whatever you can. I'm not going to tell you to buy followers, but do close to whatever you can by collaborating or getting shout-outs to get to that threshold so that you can start ranking more consistently in the algorithm. The second part of this is making sure we're responding to every single comment. If we go back to that engagement score, we know that comments give us points. And when we comment and we respond to comments on our post, that's going to increase the amount of points that we have. So if we were able to increase our engagement score on every single post, why wouldn't we, right? Thirdly, I want us to make sure we're focusing on features that a platform is promoting. So if we look at something like Twitter Spaces or LinkedIn having stories for a while, or even Instagram Reels, these are new platforms that they're rolling out to oftentimes compete with other platforms, right? And so they are going to, in an attempt to siphon you away from the old platform, increase your views or your reach early on. So my thought to you is, let's use those features early and often to take advantage of that wave of organic reach. Finally, we need to make sure we're creating content for the half-a-second end user. And this thought sort of falls into two parts. So the first part is that we all probably understand that you're not spending a lot of time on a piece of content, right? You got to get their attention right away. And we can do that from making sure the content is formatted the right way. If we're on a vertical platform, making sure our video is cropped vertically versus a horizontal video platform. Making sure the first part of our video or our graphics are really engaging, making people want to watch or scroll through more. Making sure our caption is something that people actually want to read through and they might want to engage with in the comments. The second part of this is making sure we're creating with an end user in mind. I often like to have 1 to 3 personas that I'm creating for. And it acts as a litmus test for me to say, okay, would this type of person actually be engaged with this content? Would they actually like this content? And fortunately for me, oftentimes when I run client social media pages, that end user or that persona is me. So I can use myself as a litmus test and say, is this something I'd actually enjoy? And we're going to be our own biggest critics, but at the same time, we are the ones creating the content. So we have to be honest with ourselves and say, even though I spent all this time on this content, is this something that is really going to resonate with that end user? And I want to sit on that last point for a second, because you might think I'm hyperbolizing when I'm saying you only get half a second to capture somebody's attention. But in reality, users only spend 1.7 seconds on a piece of content before they end up scrolling on. This is according to Facebook. So we have to make sure that, on average, we're creating content that can grab people under 2 seconds. But there's another side of that coin where we can't just be creating content that people only consume for 2 seconds. Because if we did that, we'd never have the forum to share our story, share our brand message, make a final pitch, whatever our call to action is. So we have to make sure we're allowing for our content to facilitate engagement along each step. How often people, or how willing people are to commit or engage with our content. And to do that, I want to introduce a concept to you that I call levels of engagement. So the way I think about this is through the traditional sales funnel. So if you have a list of cold prospects that you're calling, you're not going to call them and give them a 45-minute presentation on why your product or service is for them, right? You might qualify them with a couple questions, and only after that you might send them a one-pager, and then you'll follow up with a longer presentation. And only once you've gone through all those steps will you make your final offer, will you make your final pitch. We can think about social media in a very similar way. We're not going to lead with our longest form content. We're not going to lead with a 15-minute video of what we're about. That barrier to entry is way too high. We're going to start off with something that allows the consumer to qualify themselves as to if we're a brand or if this is content they want to keep engaging with. And then we can start introducing longer and longer forms of content that they might spend more time consuming. At the end of that, then we'll have a call to action. And for many of us, it might not be a sale. It might just be a click over to a website. To ground this in a more specific example, we can look at a real estate agent that I work with here in Minneapolis. And all this content is going to be curated around a single property. So first, we might introduce a new consumer or a new user on Instagram, let's say, to a graphic that has high-level information about the property. They can scroll through it in that 1.7 seconds-ish, and they can see if this property is something that's for them. Once they've decided that this is something they might want to pursue, then we might have a longer text post. Then we might follow that up with a video that they can watch. And then there might also be a longer form video where the real estate agent is sharing a little bit more about himself and about the story of the property. And only once that person has gone through all of those levels and they've engaged at each of those steps would we follow up with some sort of call to action. And that could be a click over to a website to schedule a tour, or maybe the real estate agent follows up with a DM. I think we often get stuck in this trap, too, of thinking that, okay, engagement rate is measured on social media, for those of you who don't know, by likes, comments, and shares divided by how many people follow you. That's the traditional engagement rate metric. But that's not all engagement has to be. It can be something that's facilitated in the direct messages. It can also be something that happens on Slack or Discord. Slack is a platform that I've been using a lot recently, not only for work, but as a way to take people from an Instagram page and move them to a place that can better facilitate that sort of communication or community that people often crave. Then there's another level to that, where people are willing to pay to see your content and to be a part of this community that you're creating. And that's where platforms like Patreon and even OnlyFans might come in. But however you choose to engage with your communities, what you have to remember is that what you're trying to do is replicate that one-on-one human interaction at scale. And this can be at any scale. Imagine if you were to walk into a room and there were 75, maybe 100 people here that wanted to listen to what you had to say. How would you feel? You'd probably feel a little nervous, maybe excited, kind of confused while they're all here to listen to you. I'm feeling a little bit of all of those things right about now. But that's the same opportunity that we have when we put an Instagram story up to 100 followers. Now, it's the same opportunity that you have, that I have, standing before you today. And going forward, I hope that you choose to take the chance on that unique opportunity to start a new job, to get a new client, to start a new side hustle. Because increasingly, we're going to become a society that's more concerned with consumer privacy and the effects that these algorithms have had on people. And all that means for us marketers is that it's going to be harder to grow than it was 5 years ago. It's going to be harder for a high school kid like me to get 150,000 followers on Twitter. So this means that we should be focusing on creating the infrastructure around the content we're creating and taking a more proactive role in cultivating the communities that we want. We need to make sure that we're allowing for these different levels of engagement and focusing on making sure that we're able to tell our story in unique ways every single time. I don't want any platform outage or any copyright policy violation, in my case, to be the reason that we lose the ability to reach and share our message with different people. We need to remember that 100,000 followers isn't a goal. It's an outcome. All we're trying to do at the end of the day with social media is give people our pitch of why they should listen to us. And in order to do that most effectively, we need to make sure that engagement is the reason for our growth and not just the byproduct of it. Thank you.